Hi, welcome. Today I want to talk about the uncensored annotated edition of The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This was my third reading of this brilliant novel, and I want to talk about the changes that have been made in the manuscript after Oscar Wilde's trial. He was convicted for gross indecency, and sections of The Picture of Dorian Gray were read in the courtroom. These sections were marked in this particular edition, and I want to read some sections. I also want to share with you my favorite passages and show you what I annotated in my book. So what I did, this is the edition edited by Nicholas Frankel, and it is the original manuscript, and it has illustrations and pictures. It has a lot of footnotes. As you can see, there are a lot of footnotes, and I marked sections that I really want to talk to you about. So this third reading of The Picture of Dorian Gray was a very deep and analytical reading for me. Here we have the original text, and then on the side we always have the footnotes. And at the end of the book, we have a section where we get an overview of things that have been changed by either Oscar Wilde himself because of the scandal or his publisher. A little bit of background. So, days after publication, all copies were removed from the bookstalls. It was first published in a magazine. The public was outraged. Oscar Wilde removed homosexual allusions and emphasized Dorian being a monster in the final scene to have a more appropriate moral conclusion. What I did is I read my original copy that has been censored, and I marked everything that I loved in this copy. I highlighted things, and I also at the same time went over the changes that have been made in here and read the sections that have been censored with the footnotes that come in this book. So I used both editions for my third deep reading of The Picture of Dorian Gray. Now let me first grab my old copy, and I would like to show you the sections that I marked in this copy. Because if you haven't yet read The Picture of Dorian Gray, then I really hope that this convinces you to give the book a try. Here are some quotes, as you can see, that I really loved. There is only one thing in the world worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about. I also really love the description of Dorian Gray himself, this young Adonis who looks as if he were made out of ivory and rose leaves. This quote, "But beauty, real beauty, ends where intellectual expression begins. Intellect is in itself a mode of exaggeration and destroys the harmony of any face." I have grown to love secrecy. It seems to be the only thing that can make a modern life mysterious or marvelous to us. The commonest thing is delightful if one only hides it. There is nothing that art cannot express. And here I see I have marked a section, but I didn't mark it with my marker. So let's do it together. For your information, I am using a Tombow water-based marker. You have both. You have the alcohol-based and the water-based. The water-based markers do not bleed through. Let me show you. So this is a section that I marked, and this is the other side. And as you can see, it doesn't bleed through. Okay, so let's mark this section together. In the wild struggle for existence, we want to have something that endures. And so we fill our minds with rubbish and facts in the silly hope of keeping our place. The thoroughly well-informed man, that is the modern ideal. And the mind of the thoroughly well-informed man is a dreadful thing. Here I marked a reference to Schumann's forest scenes. The aim of life is self-development, to realize one's nature perfectly. That is what each of us is here for. And then here, this is a section that has been read in the courtroom, and I want to read it to you. Now, there have been read 5 paragraphs I wrote down, so I won't do all the 5 paragraphs because they are very long, but let's just do the first one. "And yet," continued Lord Henry in his low musical voice and with that graceful wave of the hand that was always so characteristic of him, and that he had even in his Eton days, "I believe that if one man were to live out his life fully and completely, were to give form to every feeling, expression to every thought, reality to every dream, I believe that the world would gain such a fresh impulse of joy that we would forget all the melodies of medievalism and return to the Hellenic ideal, to something finer, richer than the Hellenic ideal, it may be. But the bravest man amongst us is afraid of himself. The mutilation of the savage has its tragic survival in the self-denial that mars our lives. We are punished for our refusals. Every impulse that we strive to strangle broods in the mind and poisons us. The body sins once and has done with its sin, for action is a mode of purification. Nothing remains then but the recollection of a pleasure or the luxury of a regret. The only way to get rid of a temptation is to yield to it. Resist it, and your soul grows sick with longing for the things it has forbidden to itself, with desire for what its monstrous laws have made monstrous and unlawful. It has been said that the great events of the world take place in the brain. It is in the brain, and the brain only, that the great sins of the world take place also. You, Mr. Gray, you yourself, with your rose-red youth and your rose-white boyhood, you have had passions that have made you afraid, thoughts that have filled you with terror, daydreams and sleeping dreams whose mere memory might stain your cheek with shame. I marked the shadow of his own loveliness because I found that so beautiful. And also concerning the beauty of Dorian Gray, the sense of his own beauty came on him like a revelation. And then here the wish that Dorian speaks, that he doesn't want to grow old, which is like the premise of the whole book. I wonder who it was defined man as a rational animal. It was the most premature definition ever given. Man is many things, but he is not rational. This really made me think of Dostoevsky, by the way. And I marked Aristotle because Aristotle was the one who remarked this in his Metaphysics. Here is a reference to Plato. There were also a lot of references to Shakespeare. Here a reference to Manon Lescaut, which is a novel. Nowadays, people know the price of everything and the value of nothing. I thought this was very cute. You filled me with a wild desire to know everything about life. There are many things that we would throw away if we were not afraid that others might pick them up. The longer I live, Dorian, the more keenly I feel that whatever was good enough for our fathers is not good enough for us. Here's a reference to Romeo and Juliet. Experience was of no ethical value. It was merely the name men gave to their mistakes. There were poisons so subtle that to know their properties one had to sicken of them. Here's a reference to Desdemona, Juliet, Imogen, again Shakespeare. Here's a reference to Gautier, Théophile Gautier. He was a huge inspiration to Oscar Wilde. I would like to read all the authors that Oscar Wilde was fond of, and I'm working through the list. Perhaps one should never put one's worship into words. Here is a section that has been read in court as well. I marked everything in a gray marker instead of a cream one. But I see that I now wrote something in pencil, probably because I couldn't find my pen. So let's rewrite this together in pen, because I wanted to stay in this book. The pen that I use to annotate is the Pilot G-Tech C4, and this pen does not bleed through. I tested this in Penguin Classics as well. It does bleed a little bit, but the paper of Penguin Classics is so thin. It is the worst paper, in my opinion. Oxford World's Classics is better in this. So this was read in court until paragraph 1 of chapter 11. Okay, so let's read this section. His eye fell on the yellow book that Lord Henry had sent him. What was it? He wondered. He went towards the little pearl-colored octagonal stand that had always looked to him the work of some strange Egyptian bees that wrought in silver, and taking up the volume, flung himself into an armchair and began to turn over the leaves. After a few minutes he became absorbed. It was the strangest book that he had ever read. It seemed to him that in exquisite raiment and to the delicate sound of flutes, the sins of the world were passing in dumb show before him. Things that he had dimly dreamed of were suddenly made real to him. Things of which he had never dreamed were gradually revealed. It was a novel without a plot, and with only one character, being, indeed, simply a psychological study of a certain young Parisian who spent his life trying to realize in the 19th century all the passions and modes of thought that belonged to every century except his own, and to sum up, as it were, in himself the various moods through which the world's spirit had ever passed. Loving for their mere artificiality those renunciations that men have unwisely called virtue, as much as those natural rebellions that wise men still call sin, and so on. So it was read until the first paragraph of chapter 11. And the first sentence of chapter 11 is still, Dorian Gray could not free himself from the influence of this book. So this is about the book À Rebours by Joris Karel Huysmans. And this was a French novel. Now, why is it called the Yellow Book? Back in the days when dirty French novels were published, these novels had the color yellow. They all had yellow covers, and the problem was that Mr. Oscar Wilde had been seen coming out of a hotel, I think, carrying a yellow book. The scandal. What a horrible thing indeed. We are continuing. Here is another reference. We have Gautier's Emo et Camé. I am going to write here the references of the works. Chopin is also mentioned multiple times, and it is something that Dorian Gray plays. Here is another quote that I forgot to mark. One should never do anything that one cannot talk about after dinner. And another one, the books that the world calls immoral are books that show the world its own shame. Which is an amazing quote to end with. Now, let's move to the uncensored edition, because there are some notes that I want to talk to you about. I marked some things for you. Let's start in the back, because we are weird. This is a section that the publisher deleted from the manuscript. Well, having met you and loved you will teach her to despise her husband, and she will be wretched. Upon the other hand, had she become your mistress, she would have lived in the society of charming and cultured men. You would have educated her, taught her how to dress, how to talk, how to move. You would have made her perfect, and she would have been extremely happy. After a time, no doubt, you would have grown tired of her. She would have made a scene. You would have made a settlement. Then a new career would have begun for her. Here has been a cut of the name of a novel that has been invented by Oscar Wilde, Le Secret de Raoul. And here, in this footnote, it is explained, Le Secret de Raoul perhaps alludes to Rachil's novel Monsieur Vénus, in which Rachil's cross-dressing female protagonist, Raoul de Vénérande, takes the effeminate Jacques Silver as a mistress. Monde and Rachilde were at the forefront of the French decadent school. So yes, if you want to read them, because they are in the Picture of Dorian Gray, you can. And then I have here a final note. And this is what I told you before. It was reported in some newspapers that when Oscar Wilde was arrested in the Cadogan Hotel, he walked out carrying a book with a yellow cover under his arm. The horror. The horror. Anyway, those were the notes that I had for you that I wanted to share. Now, to end the video, here are all sections that either the publisher or Oscar Wilde himself altered after the scandal. I'm not going to go over everything because a lot of things are just not interesting. We're talking about details, small changes, but here are some of the changes that I want to talk to you about. He changed things like laying his hand upon his shoulder, because this was too intimate, I guess. Shaking his hand off, also deleted. If I knew that I spoke to Dorian, I would become absolutely devoted to him, and that I ought not to speak to him, was deleted. Of course, sometimes it is only for a few minutes, but a few minutes with somebody one worships mean a great deal, is deleted. But you don't really worship him, Basil replies. I do. He replaced this with, he is absolutely necessary to me. He deleted, we walk home together from the club, arm in arm. He was made to be worshipped, was deleted. Why is it that every young man that you take up seems to come to grief, to go to the bed at once? This was replaced by the publisher by, why is your friendship so fateful to young men? These were just a few examples of the changes that have been made. If you're very interested in the Picture of Dorian Gray and Oscar Wilde, then I highly recommend this edition. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're interested in knowing which works Oscar Wilde read and enjoyed, you can check out my other video on my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next week.